About 18 months ago, I received a phone call from an American citizen trying to get out of Ukraine. Unless you're Gonzalo Lira, I said, why can't you just cross the border? I am Gonzalo Lira, he replied, and I got up from my sofa and started pacing. Gonzalo, a former novelist and screenwriter, was living in Kharkiv when Russian tanks crossed the border in February 2022. He had previously built up a big following on social media as a rather controversial dating coach, Coach Red Pill. But when the war started, being in the rather unique position of being an American in Ukraine at such a pivotal moment of world history, he began reporting on the war.
Zelensky regime is doing something frankly evil, because it is evil to put civilians, to encourage civilians to do something that incredibly dangerous and irresponsible.
He was critical of the Ukrainian and NATO position, and after living there for 6 years, had a deep understanding of the country. Rather unsurprisingly, 2 months into the conflict, he was arrested and his equipment confiscated. A week later, he was released and he started broadcasting again.
This is Gonzalo Lira speaking to you. It's been a wild couple of weeks, I'll tell you that. Anyway, for the time being, I don't have access to my old channels, and that's why I'm starting this new channel. Subscribe to it. I think it's going to be a hell of a lot of fun. And yeah, it'll keep on going until maybe I get arrested again.
And he carried on broadcasting almost daily for around a year. He then broadcast this video. It was just before the disastrous Ukrainian spring counteroffensive of 2023.
It's a terrible thing to consider the death of a nation, because this is the death of the Ukraine nation. The Ukraine nation, after this conflict, even if it were to end right now with the losses of those 4 oblasts plus Crimea, that, you know, a lot of pro-Kiev regime propagandists say, oh, we'll take back Crimea. Oh, come on, grow up. It's never going to happen. And this, you know, vaunted offensive, they keep postponing it. Why do you think they keep postponing it? Because they don't have what it takes to win. And more likely than not, all those poor young men who are thrown into this offensive, they're going to be killed or wounded in horrible ways that will affect their entire lives.
He turned out to be right, of course. The Ukrainian counteroffensive was one of the most disastrous military escapades of modern warfare, leading to the death of tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers with no meaningful gains. 5 days after broadcasting this video, he was arrested again at his home by armed men. He spent around 9 weeks in jail. There was much confusion online about what had happened to him. And so it was then, a week after he got out, on a warm summer's evening in July, that I received the call from him. He contacted me because I had previously got out of Ukraine during the conflict, fearing arrest for my own reporting. He told me that he was due back in court a couple of weeks later, where he was certain that he would be sentenced to a lengthy term in a labor camp. I won't survive it, he said. And he spoke in depth about his ordeal in jail. Beaten up by the other prisoners, he believed, on the order of the guards. They broke his ribs and extorted money from him. I believe and still believe everything he told me. I should have left the country after the first time they arrested me, he lamented. Many couldn't understand why he didn't leave and why he chose to carry on broadcasting instead. While researching this piece, I came across an old clip of him in his Coach Red Pill days.
Be aware of the clock, because your time is limited on this earth. And like I always say, the days are long, but the decades are short. The secret to a long life is knowing when it's time to go. You're going to find in life that the things you hate, more often than not, either define who you are or reveal who you aren't. In my own case, I hate cowards. I hate them with a passion. What I'm worried about is being a coward in life, about not taking chances when I should. You see, I don't want to have regret in my life.
Whatever his reasons, he told me that he had made up his mind, that he was going to try and cross the border to escape the country. But the thing that stays with me most was when I asked him, why don't you go to the American consulate? I don't trust them, he replied. They won't help. How could an American citizen facing jail for voicing his opinion in a foreign country, an ally of the United States, who had been tortured in jail, feel that he couldn't go to them for help. And so instead, 10 days later, just days before he was due back in court, he got on his motorbike with all the belongings he could carry, and like a character in one of his books, sped 1,300 kilometers across Ukraine.
Started as a free speech issue. But because of the SBU and the inherent corruption of the SBU and the criminal justice system in Ukraine, I will definitely be sent to a prison labor camp where I will most certainly die. And so I decided that the smart thing was take my chances in terms of getting across the border. Right now, I'm maybe 5 kilometers away from the border with Hungary.
For the following days, the internet became awash with speculation. Had he made it across? But I knew, really, with that sinking feeling when I saw the video, for what it was, a forlorn bid for freedom from a desperate man who had run out of options. And sure enough, authorities soon announced that he had been arrested again. He spent the following months in jail. The likes of Tucker Carlson and Elon Musk tried to draw attention to his plight. But in February 2024, the news broke via a letter he had written to his sister, saying that he was seriously ill and about to undergo an operation, and that he did not know whether he would survive. He didn't. His death was soon confirmed. Gonzalo's father, amongst others, alleged that he was murdered by the Ukrainian authorities and blamed the US for not helping him.
What they did to my son is an assassination. My son did not have any criminal charges. My son used the power of freedom of speech. And I cannot condone this terrible government that the USA has. The intention was to make them ill and have them die of natural causes. That is what they did to my son Gonzalo Lira.
And months later, in November 2024, more strength to the allegations that he was killed came from the Ukrainian opposition lawmaker Alexander Dubinsky, who stated, "We have come into possession of irrefutable proof that American citizen and blogger Gonzalo Lira was tortured in the Kharkov detention facility. He was beaten in the same way I was in the Kiev detention facility. He was taken to a cell in putrid conditions where they extorted money from him. When he made this public, he was killed."
The start of the genesis of this whole situation is because I had an opinion that went against the narrative. And that's why I went to prison. And that's why, if I'm arrested again, I will die in prison. The American State Department knows exactly who I am and the situation I'm currently involved in. And they know the fate that awaits me. They know it. You know, they have that saying that, I forget the wording exactly. You know, I'm a little stressed out, as you can imagine. But they have that saying that people are fundamentally good, but for evil to triumph, all you need is the indifference of good people. Please don't be indifferent to my fate. I ask you this very humbly. Please recognize that, well, the literal death that awaits me if this doesn't work out.
We spoke for a couple of hours. I couldn't help him, get him out, that is. Nobody could, except the US government, and they failed to do so. He also told me it was just good to speak to someone, emotional support and all that stuff, and we talked politics a bit. He believed it was in Ukraine's interest to make peace with Russia, and that it was in America's interest to do so too. As the months and years roll by, many are realizing that he was right all along. He spoke up, and he paid with his life. My guest today is Brian Berletic, formerly in the US Marine Corps, now an independent political analyst based in Bangkok. He was in regular contact with Gonzalo before he was arrested. So, Brian, good to see you. Thank you for joining me. So can I ask you how well you knew Gonzalo, first of all?
Well, I knew him over the course of a year or more since the special military operation began. He hosted live roundtable discussions on his YouTube channel, and I participated in those often. I talked to him during those roundtable discussions, as well as often for an hour or more afterwards. And because he was there in Ukraine by himself, and he really was quite isolated, he would talk to me quite a bit, just privately over Skype, especially when he was arrested. He was in and out of jail, and he was those last days and weeks. He talked to me quite a bit, telling me about the ordeal he was going through, trying to figure out what kind of help he might be able to get, because again, he was quite isolated and surrounded there in Ukraine.
Yeah, that's the sense I got as well. I mean, I only spoke to him once when he was trying to get out of Ukraine, because obviously I'd got out of Ukraine before, and that's the sense that I got, especially towards the end, that he was very isolated and he'd kind of run out of options. Some people see him as a bit of a controversial figure, but it's clear to me anyway that he stood up and spoke out because he was very much against what was happening. Is that your view? Why do you think he spoke out? I mean, he knew the risks. Why did he do it?
He was controversial. He had some extreme views on other topics, but I think overall his heart was in the right place. He was deeply interested in the truth. And the reason why I liked interacting with him was specifically because if you laid out enough evidence, even if it was a deeply held conviction that he had, he would change his mind and he would come around. And he did that on several key issues. With regards to the situation in Ukraine, it was clear cut what was going on. This is a U.S. NATO proxy war waged on Russia at the expense of the Ukrainian people. He had made Ukraine his adopted home. He had a family that was Ukrainian, children were Ukrainian, and he felt very deeply about the turmoil and tragedy that they were being put through. He had a front row seat to it in Kharkov, in eastern Ukraine. And I think his personality, he was kind of proud and stubborn and determined. And I think overall, more or less indifferent, I would say brave in the face of consequences. He knew that there were going to be consequences. And even as the consequences added up, he continued doing what he was doing. And even in the last days, I wouldn't say that he was not concerned about what was happening. He knew basically if he went to jail, he would die. And he was absolutely right about that. And he continued right to the very end. So I think it says a lot about the kind of person he was. Whatever other negative things you want to say about him, that was an issue he was right about, and he stood his ground until his last breath.
Because it seems, that there's a number of kind of alternative journalists, if you like, who have been critical of Ukrainian and NATO policy. You know of them, most of them, I'm sure, as I do. And many of us couldn't believe why he kept doing it. How he kept speaking out. We kind of knew that inevitably he would be arrested. Some people even thought he might be some kind of Ukrainian or Western spy, or because they couldn't understand his actions. But it seems, trying to explain it, he was a wild character, and sometimes people do strange things, and that seemed to be Gonzalo.
Absolutely, and something people have to understand. A lot of the criticism launched against him were by people who just personally didn't like him. They had an axe to grind, and they used this as an opportunity. And I think that reflects more on those individuals than it did on Gonzalo Lira. You have to understand the situation, and the situation in Ukraine is absolute turmoil. The government is out of control. The military is out of control. Daily life for ordinary people has been turned upside down since 2014, really. And so Ukraine not cracking down on Gonzalo Lira the way people imagined they should have or could have. It's just a disconnect from the reality of what is actually happening in Ukraine. Ukraine is not all powerful. The SBU is not all powerful. There's limits to what they can do. They have their plate full. They have a lot of people who disagree with them that they have to process and jail or disappear or deal with in other ways. And so Gonzalo Lira, maybe he slipped through the cracks there for a while, but eventually they did get him. The other issue was he was an American. I think he thought that might have played to his advantage, and maybe it did. That maybe that's why he was able to get as far as he did. He was an American. They were worried about it, but I think eventually, somewhere along the line, they either didn't care or maybe someone in the State Department gave the green light. The State Department, we all know for a fact, was aware of his situation, and they didn't care. They did nothing to intervene and did nothing to help him.
That's one of my main sort of questions about this, that, if he was a New York Times journalist, they would have done everything they could to help him. But because he was an independent journalist, critical of Ukrainian and NATO policy, it seems they didn't care. I mean, I asked him when I spoke to him, I was trying to help him, trying to figure out ways to get him out. I said to him, why don't you go to the American consulate? And he said to me, they won't help me. They won't care. And that for me is the saddest part of that. I mean, do you think if Trump was in power, Elon Musk and Tucker Carlson spoke up for him. Do you think if Trump was in power, they would have helped him?
It's difficult to say. We could already see Trump is actually in power. He's paying a lot of lip service to reversing policies, but in actuality, his actions, he's doing none of the above. He's actually doubling down on almost everything. Would someone like Tucker Carlson, if he was able to mobilize enough public support, would they maybe have gotten, at least as a token, at least to pander to his support base? Maybe not. I don't know. I guess it doesn't really matter. They could have done more at the time to raise public awareness and rally support for him, and it was just too little, too late.
And how do you think he did die? Obviously, we don't want to speculate too much, but it seems very clear to me that his jailing quickened his life enormously. But do you have any thoughts about how it might have actually happened?
Well, Gonzalo Lira said he was not in the greatest of health. I mean, he was an older gentleman. He smoked a lot. And he knew that if he went into prison, the conditions were just by default horrible. That maybe just by that he wouldn't have survived. But he had gone into prison, and then he had a brief period of time where he was out, and he was talking to me, and he was telling me he was being tortured by inmates working with guards to extort money from him. This is basically what is going on in Ukraine. This is how officials are making money off the side. They're pillaging the people, anyone and anything they can get their hands on, including Gonzalo Lira when he was in prison. So that could not have helped. And then, of course, Ukraine is in the middle of this conflict. They don't have enough weapons, supplies for their soldiers or their civilians. Of course, they couldn't care less about prisoners being jailed. And so I think it was a combination of torture and negligence that ultimately ended his life. And of course, the egregious injustice that put him in prison in the first place.
It seems to me Gonzalo's story, one of the reasons I'm doing this story, one of them is just because I don't feel anybody really stood up for him and helped him. And this is essentially a journalist who died in jail because of his beliefs. But also I think his story is an example of, there's a number of people around the world who've really criticized Ukrainian and NATO policy. Almost very few people in the mainstream have. Even though it's done huge damage to the British and European economies, almost nobody in the mainstream has spoken out. And one of the reasons for that, and I think you'll probably know some of this as well, is that the people who do, whether it's alternative journalists, some people in the mainstream, they will go for you any way they can. They will try and shut you down. They will try and destroy your career. And in Gonzalo's case, they locked him up and he died in prison. And I think that's why, Gonzalo is one of the most extreme examples of the attempts to silence critics of Ukrainian NATO policy. His second last video he made before he was arrested the last time was saying that the Ukrainian counteroffensive was going to be a disaster. It was going to lead to the death of tens of thousands of people for nothing. You know, and he was right, of course, but this was at a time when so much propaganda was being put into the Ukrainian counteroffensive is going to be a success, it's going to be a success. And here's Gonzalo saying it's not. Just thousands of soldiers are going to die or be maimed. And he was arrested a couple of days later. And he seems to me an example of the attempts to silence any criticism.
It's a testament to the true nature of the collective West. What he was jailed and ultimately killed for saying then is something now the collective Western media, because it can't be hidden any longer. It's something that they're saying on a daily basis now. And it's just, again, it just tells you so much about what the West really stands for when they're saying these things now because there is no way to hide it. But when they thought there was still a way of foisting this illusion onto the global public, they were willing to do anything to silence people. They've erased YouTube channels. They deplatformed people off of other social media platforms. And as we are discussing right now, they literally jailed an American citizen in Ukraine. The State Department knew he was jailed, and they let him perish. I mean, it just goes to show you that is what the West really stands for. Might makes right, and there's no limit to what they will do to achieve their objectives.
Because also it seems to be self-damaging. I mean, as I say, when you look at the damage this has done to British and European policy, you know, the amount of money the Americans have put into it, and they'll also try and shut down anybody who tries to question that policy. It's a circle of incompetence, and that's what worries me. That people who stand up, I mean, Gonzalo Lira, he seemed to me a patriotic American. Would you say that's right?
Absolutely. He was thinking about the best interests of his adopted home, Ukraine. He could see what was being done to Russia was insidious. This was a proxy war. This was not a war of aggression launched by Russia. This was a reaction to decades of NATO encroachment all along Russia's borders with the intent to absorb Russia eventually. And of course, he, as an American, he could see that this was obviously, as you say, it's self-damaging, this policy. And it's not just Ukraine. It is all of these wars of aggression, all of this interference abroad, this global pursuit of primacy, which is ultimately unsustainable and will collapse. And before it collapses, it is going to do, and already is doing, tremendous damage to the American people and the collective West as a whole. So yes, he was speaking up about all of this. And again, look at the Western media now. They are admitting all of this now, things that he was saying, that he was called a Russian agent for and jailed for and killed for. They are now all openly discussing this in the Washington Post and the New York Times.
Absolutely. Many of us knew the counteroffensive would be a disaster, and now they're looking into why it was, and they try to silence everybody who said it was going to be a disaster at the time. It's madness. And in Ukraine as well, finally, there's been a number of journalists killed in this war. Of course, Ukraine targets Russian journalists. And throughout the last 8 years or so, there's been Ukrainian journalists as well. I mean, it's clear that most Ukrainians want peace now as well. But one of the problems is if you try to promote peace or try to promote good relations with Russia, I know that's hard for many Ukrainians to believe in now. But the same thing will happen. I mean, the Ukrainian authorities will try and shut them down as well.
This was something Gonzalo Lira talked to me about, his experience in prison. Many of the people locked up with him were simply people who spoke up, who disagreed with what was going on, and the SBU caught wind of it and detained them. And these were people who were going to spend probably years of their life in prison simply for recognizing and speaking up about reality, not going along with this collective delusion that Ukraine was convinced to plunge itself into by the U.S., by their Western sponsors. So yes, absolutely. That is part of it. It's not just warfare on the battlefield, it's information warfare, and it's not just about spreading propaganda. It's about targeting and destroying those people, those organizations and platforms that are going to attempt to track what is being said and expose it.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Brian. I think last year, I haven't seen the statistics, but I think last year was probably the most deadliest year for journalists, certainly that I can remember. I mean, maybe throughout, modern times, largely, of course, what happened, in Israel and Gaza, etc., but also many journalists on both sides of the Ukraine war, Ukrainian, Russian, American, etc., have lost their lives. So it's important that we remember that. So thank you so much, Brian, for joining me.
Yes, absolutely. It's important to remember Gonzalo Lira, and it's also important to remember that it could be any one of us next. This is why it is so important to speak up and to remember what happened to him and why. So thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you, Brian. Well, thank you for watching. This is the first ever episode of the Moscow Report, hopefully one of many. See you next time. Good night from Moscow and good luck.
And to tell you the truth, talking has gotten me into more trouble than I can remember. All the world's a stage, and we are merely players. You shut up all the time. The question is, when do you speak? People only ever get upset when you speak the truth. Yeah.
I committed no crime against any person or property, and that my crimes are literally speech crimes. Ukraine is supposed to be this big democracy because it has European values. The American State Department knows exactly who I am. Vicki Nuland hates my guts. If I'm arrested again, I will die in prison, all because of my YouTube videos. What higher value does a democracy have than free speech?
Freedom. Okay, end of video.